Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this month's Skills Academy for Wales. Today, we're joined by Kathy Wilson-Ellis, who will be providing an introduction to human factors and behaviours. I think you're muted, but if you aren't, can I just ask you to mute yourself just so there's no distractions for Kathy? The webinar is also being recorded, and the slides and recording will be uploaded onto the SharePoint site and the Teams site after the session. Please let me know if you don't have access to these channels. So I'll hand over to you, Kathy. Thank you.
Excellent. Hello, everybody. Just about good afternoon. Hopefully you can all see the screen okay. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about human factors. What is it and why is it so important? So who am I? So I've been at WSP for just coming up to 3 years now. I lead on the human factors capability in ITS part of the business. Prior to coming here, I worked at National Highways, which was Highways England, and then Highways Agency before that, doing a variety of roles. And in those roles, it was all about trying to improve road safety, trying to prevent people getting killed or seriously injured on the strategic road network. And a lot that involved understanding why people do what they do, which is ultimately human factors, which I'll explain in a bit more detail in a few minutes. And before I worked at National Highways, I was in Greater Manchester Police for 16 years, working in intelligence, again, trying to understand why people commit crime, what's the sequence of events that led to that person making that decision and doing that action, even though they know it was wrong and hopefully there'd be a consequence. Not always the case. But it was about understanding all those sequence of events that led to it and trying to disrupt it. So ultimately you prevent that crime from occurring. So all through my career, it's all been about why people do what they do. And that is ultimately human factors. Now, there's two ways of looking at human factors. There's what people refer to as ergonomics, which is very much about how you design a product. It's about, everybody's a different size and shape. So if you're designing like a table and a chair, make sure it's the right setting for you, make sure the desk's at the right height so you don't get any injuries to yourself. So that tends to be what is referred to as ergonomics, looking at design of control panels, that kind of thing. And then there's the more wider aspect of human factors, which is ultimately the factors that affect the human in whatever it is they're trying to do. And that's the area that I very much specialise in. But as you can see up on the screen there's some different examples of factors that influence us. Now, human factors itself is made up of a mixture of different sciences. So you've got the psychology aspect. So obviously that's all about the brain, how the brain works, how we absorb information, how we use that information, how we receive that information. So when we're looking at how people behave and we're wanting to try and change that behaviour, we need to understand the psychology of people to be able to do that. We're also influenced by things like sociology. So looking at how people are influenced by their peers, by their friends, by their cultures, by their religion, so on and so forth. So they're really important factors that influence us humans in what we're doing in our day-to-day life. Biomechanics, it's basically the science of how our body physically moves. So it's about how your tendons and your muscles and your bones, how they all interact and how that ultimately makes us move as humans, which again can have an impact on our performance and whatever the task is that we're trying to do. Physiology is a bit like biomechanics, but bigger than that. So it's about how the whole body functions physically. Anthropometry, I just love saying that because it took me ages to learn how to say it, but basically that's the science of everybody's a different shape and size. So when you're designing something, very much down the ergonomics line, it's about understanding that everybody's different sizes and shapes and people work differently because of different limitations and fitness levels, so on and so forth. And physics, obviously really important with road safety, especially when you start talking about the effects of kinetic energy. So when you have an incident and a vehicle, for example, hits a solid object, it's not the action of the vehicle hitting the solid object that kills you, it's the kinetic energy, which is the force of when that vehicle hits a solid thing. So that's ultimately what physics are. And then the biggest cause of most issues, as you'll see on the list on the left, is human error. So, a bit more about human factors. So if you think about all the things that influence us as people, all these different things, so I've just talked about sociologists, talking about the culture, your religion, your influences from your family, your belief, but there's also other things. So the environment is a really good one to help really articulate what is human factors. So I don't know if you can tell today, I'm actually in one of our offices. I'm in our big Manchester office, and there is quite a lot of people in for a change today in the office. Now, and this is a bit stereotypical what I'm going to say, but it's backed up by science, so I can say it. You tend to get men and women working in such a big, large office. And what tends to happen is you'll get men walking around saying, God, it's hot in here. I wish they'd turn the air conditioner up. I wish they could open the window. And then you get women walking around who tend to have the coat on or a scarf. And I have seen people walking around clutching a hot water bottle saying it's freezing in here. The temperature in that office is exactly the same. The thing that is different is the people. So therefore, when we're talking about influencing factors, it's all those things that make us as humans different, which make us react to environmental factors, in this case, the temperature, differently. So somebody like myself who is overweight will get affected by the heat differently to somebody who isn't overweight. So again, these factors, it's important that we understand them, because if we're wanting people to do things differently, we need to understand how they do things, why they do things, in order to be able to influence them and change them. So as this diagram hopefully articulates, when we talk about it affects our ability, if you're too hot or you're too cold in this scenario, it's going to affect your performance. It can lead to error. It can lead to fatigue, which then can lead to distraction and so on and so forth. So it's about really understanding all the things that happen around us and all the different things that make us who we are, and how those two things interlink, which result in us, really trying to understand why people do what they do. So bear with me. This is just another way of trying to articulate it. So like I said, my background certainly at highways was all about road safety. It was all about trying to prevent collisions on the motorway network. So here is a classic scenario. The scenario is, right, Kathy, there's been a really bad collision. There's been a vehicle that's left the network and hit a tree. And as a result, that person's got seriously injured. How do we prevent that from happening again? So the standard response, especially because Highways England in this case were predominantly engineers, would be, oh, well, that's simple. We'll remove the tree. I'm like, well, you can't remove the tree. Think about the climate. Think about sustainability. It's not the tree's fault. The tree didn't do anything. The tree didn't jump out in front of the car. It's not the tree's fault. Can't remove the tree. What else can we do? Well, we'll put a barrier around the tree. Well, that's not really going to work. They're just going to hit the barrier instead of the tree. We'll put bubble wrap around the tree, so at least when the vehicle hits it, it bounces off, it absorbs the kinetic energy. Nice idea. I'm sure there's some environmental reasons why you can't wrap trees in plastic. Not the best idea. So then they say, all right then, Kathy, what's the solution? So I say, right. It's nothing to do with the tree. The tree is just a consequence of that collision. In order to prevent it happening again in the future, you've got to understand why did the car leave the network and hit the tree. So this is where we start really delving into what happened in that sequence of events. So it could be that the person who was driving that vehicle, so it could be that the people who were driving that vehicle is tired, is distracted, is fatigued, is not been sleeping. They may have a newborn baby at home, therefore they're not sleeping, so they're tired, which can result in them having this collision. It could be that they're on prescribed medication. Quite often it says on all the boxes when you get medication from the doctors, do not drive, do not operate machinery, so on and so forth. But, most people tend to not read that or disregard that, or get into the good old human mindset of, oh, they don't mean me, that doesn't apply to me, I'll be fine. And then you tend to find that people drive and do actually get affected by the medication without realising it. Or it could be that they're so overloaded mentally, cognitively, oh God, I can't even say it, in the head, they get overloaded because they've got so much going on. They might be under a lot of pressure at work, they might be under a lot of stress because of various financial reasons, whatever. So all these different things in this scenario actually affected the driver's ability to concentrate, which resulted in the vehicle leaving the network and hitting the tree. So removing the tree would never have avoided that outcome, because it would just have hit a barrier or it would have hit something else. That incident was still going to happen. So in order to prevent it, you've got to look at the person. You've got to understand what things were distracting that person and how can you change that sequence of events that avoids it happening altogether. And that is human factors. It's all that human bit understanding it. So another way of just kind of trying to cement that concept is something called the Swiss cheese model. So the idea of the Swiss cheese model is each one of these different slices of cheese represent different parts of that sequence of events that led, in this scenario, to the vehicle hitting the tree. So it could be that it was raining. It could be that there were poor quality tyres on the vehicle, therefore the brakes didn't work as great. It could be that, they were on the phone or something. The idea with the Swiss cheese model is that you don't have to eradicate every single slice of cheese. All you have to do is misalign those holes that you can see on the diagram. So you could do something about the low tyre tread, for example. If that vehicle had better tyres on, then in theory, in this scenario, the vehicle wouldn't have had that collision. Or if the person wasn't on the phone, that slice of cheese is misaligned, therefore it wouldn't have resulted in the same outcome. That's the idea of the Swiss cheese model in this scenario. So just moving on a bit, again, I know I'm focusing very much on road safety today, but it's just to give you a good feel of how human factors can be applied in this area, but it can be applied in anything you're trying to do. But in road safety, one of the key models that we often refer to is something called the safe system. Now, the safe system, as you can see on the screen, ultimately what we want to do, be it in WSP, our consultancy, or in our public sector clients who we work for, or the emergency services, everybody wants to get home safe at the end of the day. That's it. That's the ultimate goal for us as a society. That's what everybody wants. So how do you do that? Well, the idea is that you have a safe road and you have safe vehicles and you have people driving in a safe, compliant manner. Hey, presto, you've cracked it. People will get home safe and well. But sadly, that's not always the case. So as you can see here, the road itself doesn't hurt anybody. The infrastructure doesn't hurt a single person. It's just a solid thing that's there. It doesn't move and it doesn't hurt anybody. You put a vehicle in the scenario, a vehicle doesn't hurt anybody. A vehicle doesn't crash into anything on its own. Not yet anyway. The reason it all goes wrong is when you put a human into that equation, because it's when the human is either not maintaining the vehicle, it's not roadworthy, or they're not driving in a safe, compliant manner, which then results in the human and the vehicle combination interacting with the infrastructure in a negative way, which leads to a collision. So the common denominator, the common problem is the people, which is why you need human factors, which is why you need to be able to understand people, all the factors that are influencing them, that are making them do what they do, and change them and change that sequence of events. So I've mentioned a couple of times already the word human error. Now, some people say that human error is inevitable, and some even say it's acceptable. We're human, we make mistakes. I kind of disagree with that. Personally, I disagree with that because there's always a reason why people make that error. There's always a reason why something has happened. And if we put the time and effort into understanding what led to that, then it can be avoided. So therefore, it's not inevitable, and it's certainly not acceptable. Now, when you start looking about human error, that's a whole science in its own right. Basically, you can split it into three groups. So this is just a diagram I took from a piece of work I was doing looking at when people failed to comply with a tunnel closure. And it was just a good way of articulating why people fail to do something. And you can split it into three groups. The vast majority of the human race want to obey. People naturally want to be part of the group where it's the accepted group, it's the norm, it's where they don't get any focus, they can just get on with their day-to-day life. Most people try to do the right thing, therefore they obey the rules of society, they obey, the rules of the road in this scenario. And then you've got the people at the complete other end of the spectrum, who are those who willingly choose to violate. So again, going back to my olden days when I worked in the police, most of the society know that you shouldn't murder people, you shouldn't steal from people, you shouldn't steal cars, so on and so forth. So they want to obey, they want to be in the vast majority of people who don't break the law. But then you do have those people, sadly, who willingly choose to violate those laws. They know it's wrong to commit murder, they know it's wrong to thieve and burgle and so on and so forth, but they do it anyway. So they've made a conscious decision to violate. And you have to deal with them completely different to the ones who obey. And then you've got the other ones in the middle, who are those who haven't obeyed, but they've not done it kind of consciously, they've not done it deliberately. And again, it's about then understanding what made them not obey those rules of the road. So in this case, we're talking about they failed to comply with a tunnel closure. So why did they fail? Could it be that they were distracted? They didn't see that the tunnel was closed. Could it be that they don't trust the system? Could it be they don't trust the signage around that tunnel? Therefore, they didn't believe it was really closed, so they kind of chanced it. Could it be that they didn't see the warning signs? Was there glare on the signs? Was it raining so much? Are the signs covered by trees? So on and so forth. So again, it goes back to the point I made before. If you really want to prevent human error, in this case, make sure that people do comply with tunnel closures, you need to look at who your road users are and split them into that obey violators and fail to obey. And then you need to tweak how you actually deal with those people. And that's where something like this comes in. So this is a kind of basic example of a compliance strategy. And as you can see at the very top, at the widest part of the triangle is your compliance section. Most people comply, you don't have a problem. Most people understand what they're doing. Where you need your focus to be on is the other three sections, so your amber and your orange and your red on the screen. So you want to make it easy for people to comply. It's got to be the easy option for people to do it. So by making sure that people understand, there is a consequence to their action if they violate, if they choose not to do something, they need to know there's a real risk of a consequence in order to get people not to do it and to comply. And you've got to make the option of complying the easy option. Then you get a little bit further down the triangle and you've got people where it's this detection deterrence. So again, you've got people who are not obeying. They're in that borderline of they are kind of doing it consciously because they might be on the phone, they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing, which has resulted in them not complying with, for example, a tunnel closure. But it's about understanding why they're doing it and trying to eradicate those root causes that I keep talking about. And then you've got those at the very bottom, the ones who actively, willfully, consciously choose to violate. And the only way you're going to change their behaviours is by enforcement. And that's it. I know that is a really, really quick run through about human factors, but I wanted to leave enough time to have a bit of a discussion about it and any questions you may have about human factors. But hopefully what you've got there was just enough of an insight as to what human factors is and just start to have a think about how it can be applied to everything that we do. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then if anybody wants to ask me any questions, please go ahead.
Thanks, Kathy. That was great. Really interesting. Really good introduction. Yeah, if anyone does have any questions, please just post them in the chat box or raise your hand and I'll unmute you.
Yeah, hi, that was really interesting.
Hi.
Thank you very much. I'm
You're
Andrea
welcome.
Morgan, Head of Sustainability in Local Government.
Hi.
We're looking into the behavioural challenges around applying net zero and sustainability. And I just wondered, Kathy, if you found those themes around obey, violate and compliance, whether you could apply those across any scenario in effect?
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever it is you think of, there is nothing on this planet that doesn't involve a human. From making a cup of tea to killing somebody, from one extreme to another, it involves a human. So there's always going to be that need to understand why people do what they do in order to influence and change what they do. And one of the big aspects of that is, did they mean to do it? Was it a conscious decision? What caused, what influenced them? What factors happened that made them do that? Because without it, you're going to come up with, sadly, what we do on an everyday basis, which is we come up with assumptions and misconceptions about why people do what they do, and we just go with it. We assume that people do this because of this reason, or they do this because this reason, and actually that's very rarely the case. So it's all about that, really understanding the whole sequence of event, the bigger picture. And it's interesting you talk about your area with sustainability. So the diagram I was using was from the tunnel work I was doing in Wales. And I've recently, just last week, went down and did a workshop with them. And I said, well, we've done all this work and I've really helped you understand that people often won't do what you expect them to do. And we were looking at an emergency in a tunnel when they thought that people would very calmly get out the vehicles, be able to use a fire extinguisher, follow the signs, understand the PA system and escape. And I was like, but they won't do that. People don't do that, especially when they're frightened and panicked. They'll do all sorts of crazy random things. And the last thing they will do is what you want them to do. So again, it was really getting them to understand that aspect. But they were saying, well, we understand all that, but we've also got this big pressure from Welsh Government now where it's all about sustainability and it's all about the climate and it's all about inclusivity in communities and so on and so forth. And we don't understand anymore. It used to be all about safety and now it's all about the environment, and we don't understand where the two go together. I'm like, well, of course they go together. Firstly of all, it's humans. It's the humans who are, causing you problems in your tunnels, and it's the humans who are causing the problem to the climate. So they kind of go hand in hand. But if you can prevent incidents, therefore you achieve your safety aspect, you're then preventing congestion. And a lot of your congestion is causing the problems to the climate. So again, it's all those linkages, and it's just starting to look at things a little bit differently than we have done before, where it's all been kind of in a nice, neat box. It's now not like that. It's now more horizontal.
Yeah, there's a lot of cross-cutting themes, isn't there? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure there's lots we could discuss together. But yeah, if you
Great.
ever need any
Okay.
help on that kind of stuff, give me a shout.
I will. I'll be in touch, definitely. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Okay, we've just had another question through. Has your research given an indicative size of the different groupings of or people, e.g. 1%, 5%, etc.?
Not in the research I've done personally. There is some research out there that may well have them more what's the word, like defined statistics. But like I said, the work I've done, it's always kind of been, well, let's just look at, you know, which is the highest proportion in terms of society. So when I was in highways and I was looking at things on the strategic road network, we always said that 3/4 of the population we were targeting were complying. It's that, you know, most people do comply. They kind of know the rules of the road. They, you know, they kind of behave. Everything's fine. It's that last quarter, and out of that last quarter, again, you can split it so that the very small section is those who willfully violate, and then the other section of those who don't comply, but they're kind of not doing it on purpose. They're kind of doing it by default. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers it, but the vast majority of people are in that comply box. It's the other end that we need to focus on, but we tend to go from one extreme to the other. We tend to go from dealing with those who comply because they're the ones you can get to and influence, even though they're not the ones that we need to get to and influence. And then we'll go to the other extreme and worry about those where we need to get enforcement involved, and we kind of forget about those in the middle who are the ones who fail to comply but kind of don't do it on purpose, and they're the ones who need most help. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We haven't had any other questions through so far. Just give people another minute or two.
Yep.
Hi, Kathy. I've got a question. I sense this is like a behavioural change, and it's about managing change. And from your experience, is that linked to culture and things that people have done for years? And what tips do you have?
Oh, the tips. The biggest tip I'd have is don't ever think you understand people, because they never ever do what you think they're going to do. So yeah, and I guess a lot of my work is about behavior change, because if you want to change a sequence of events that involves a human, somewhere along the line you've got to influence the human, because we know that the kind of, you know, the thing that's affecting the success of what you're doing. So let's look at smart motorways as an example. So we're not going to get into the whole conversation about whether they're safe, they're not, whether you like them, you don't. Let's just park all that. The idea of a smart motorway, the concept back in the day, was it was to increase capacity. That's what they were developed for. So you could utilise what was the hard shoulder, make it a live lane. You've suddenly got 4 lanes of available carriageway as opposed to just 3. Brilliant. So the question is, do they work? Have they actually achieved their objective? And you can argue, well, not really. They're not getting as much capacity as we thought they would. So then you ask the question, well, why? Because and that annoying child. Yeah, but why? Why is that the case? And you start saying, well, why? Well, the reason is people aren't always using that additional lane. They're still cramming into 3 lanes. So you say, well, why are people not using it? What's the issue that's prevented us achieving our objective of increasing capacity? And surprise, surprise, it comes down to people, and it comes down to asking that question of, well, why do they not use it? Now, you can have all these assumptions and misconceptions, which is what we've done in the past, which is, oh, well, they're just not following the rules. The rules are out there and people are just being stupid. It's human error and people aren't using it. But when you break it down even further, again, that's not the case. When you actually take the time to engage with the people and actually ask them instead of just assuming you know the answer, which is a really big game-changing approach, is you ask them and they say, I don't trust the signs, I'm scared, I've been influenced by the media, I've been influenced by my family and friends because they said they know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and they were doing that. And when they went around the corner, there was a broken down vehicle and they nearly hit it, or, you know, all sorts of reasons that came out. So yes, people are heavily influenced by their friends, by their family, but you're also influenced by your experience. So if you're, for example, a HGV driver who's driving on a very regular basis on a smart motorway, they're going to trust that system much more than somebody who's not a regular user of a motorway, when it's all a bit of a alien environment to them and it's all a bit scary and it's all a bit, they're really on pins trying to, you know, deal with that, driving that kind of new type of road. So in a roundabout way, yes, hopefully that answered your question, that yes, people are heavily influenced by the society around them, and that can be a cultural thing as well. Another example just to throw into answering that question is, again, back in the day when I was at Highways, we had quite a problem in certain locations of the country where people would pull up onto what was then a hard shoulder to get out to pray, because it was part of their religion to pray at a certain time of day, no matter where they were. And obviously there's a massive safety risk to that, absolutely massive, and a distraction element and all the rest of it. So again, it was finding a way to engage with those people that was fully respectful of their need as part of their religion to do that activity, but to kind of also try and get across that perhaps there's a bit of a safer place to do it. Otherwise, you might be meeting your maker a bit sooner than you were planning. So again, there's ways of, you've just got to be aware of it.
I agree with you. I think it's that education piece, but how do you deliver that to max it? That's the challenge, isn't it?
It is a challenge. So what we found when we were trying to influence all the road users on the strategic road network, of which there's millions, how the heck do you get to them? Well, you can get to pockets of them. You can get to pockets of society. So you can go through, you know, like road associations. So like people who are advanced motorists, you can engage with them, and you can people who are in, I don't know, historic classic car groups or motorbike groups, so on and so forth. But really, the people who are in those groups, those associations, aren't really the people who are not complying on the road. So really, just because you can get to them, they're not the vast majority, and they're not the ones you really need to get to. So we kind of sat back and said, well, how on earth do we get to the public? Because if you put a sign up, not everybody understands it, not everybody interprets it how you intended them to. There'll be all sorts of misinterpretations of it. Not everybody will see it, not everybody will pay attention to it. So how do you get to them? So that's where we came up with the concept, well, hang on a minute, everybody who's driving a vehicle on whatever road is either driving for work, commuting to and from work, or they're in a vehicle that's funded by somebody somewhere who works because somebody needs some money to pay for the vehicle. So the common denominator is an employer. So if we can work with employers and get employers to make sure that their employees are driving in a safe and reliable manner in a safe and roadworthy vehicle, happy days, we've cracked it. And that's a lot of work that's now being done. It's now about looking at, instead of trying to get to the actual people at the end of the chain, how can we get to them a bit earlier on in the chain and use different resources like the employer and come at it in a different perspective? So the way to get to society is really going through the employers.
Great, that's great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think Mark has a question, and there's a few in the chat I'll read out.
Okay.
I think you've put your hand down, so I guess you haven't got a question.
Lewis has probably asked the question in our chat because human behaviour, active travel routes, do like putting cars where we think people will walk, but then when you see people cut across a little bit of green land, they're going the straightest possible route. And we've known that for years. You know, we've got new guidance which says, you know, you should look to, you know, put the straightest possible route that you can put down, and yet we still have professionals out there who default, as Lewis says, back to what they've always done, and it's kind of you do wonder, you know, it is falling on deaf ears. You know, look at human behaviour. You know, look at human behaviour, please, colleagues. You know, and how, you know, what can we do to kind of, I don't know, change those people who will default?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And one of the problems I've always found working in road safety is the natural default is to go back to engineering. Well, let's engineer our way out of this. It's got to be, if we want to prevent, I don't know, accident hotspot as an example, the default response to that is, oh, it must be something to do with the road layout or the junction layout. So let's put some barriers in, or let's put some speed ups in. Let's build something, because that's what we do. And we've got a great big manual that tells us how to do that and what process to follow and what regulations we need to follow. And we understand that because that's what we've always done. That's the way we've always done it. So happy days, we'll do that. But when I mentioned the safe system on the presentation, that's a great way that we've used in the past to be able to say, look, it's not just about the infrastructure. Yes, you can make those changes, but it's not necessarily going to solve your problem. You've got to understand what your problem is, and it's about getting that concept of it's not just one thing or another is a solution. It's a combination of things is the right solution. So it's about, in that scenario of an accident hotspot, yes, doing something to the infrastructure. Yes, maybe look at problems with people's vehicles. If they've got roadworthy tyres, you know, are people able to detect the severity of a corner and act accordingly? But again, it comes back to the people, which is the bit that's always left. So what we need to do is, whilst we're looking at society and trying to influence society, we've got to upskill our own people pretty quickly, which is what we're trying to do, to be able to say, look, you've got to be mindful of whatever it is you're doing. Don't just fall into that default setting of we're going to do it this way because that's what we've always done. Just take a minute. Just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean you should keep doing it that way. There's all sorts of different ways of doing things. And you mentioned active travel. I'm really glad you mentioned that. We need to look at what's happened to us as well as a society. So we've all hopefully come through the pandemic. Nobody ever saw it coming. Nobody ever thought we'd have gone through the last 2 years that we all have. And thank God, you know, the ones, you know, on the call today have certainly come through it because you're here. But sadly, we've all lost loved ones. We've all, you know, gone through the hell of the pandemic and the after effects of the pandemic. So lots and lots of negatives. You know, we didn't see our family and friends, so on and so forth. But there's also quite a lot of positives come out of COVID if you look at it a different way. We've demonstrated to ourselves that as a society, we're adaptable, we're resourceful. We actually cared about each other. You know, there was a nice period of time during all the lockdowns where people went out and clapped their hands for the NHS and we came together as a society. It didn't last that long, but it was nice when it did happen. But again, it just proved that as a human race, there's hope for us all. You know, we did kind of care about our neighbours and make sure that everybody had the shopping, everybody was looked after, and we changed, we adapted to those situations. In WSP, again, we all started working from home. We proved that we could keep the business going. We adapted our abilities. So we've proven that we're very resourceful and very adaptable. Now, when it comes to active travel, there is no reason why people couldn't choose to ride a bike or walk or scooter, whatever else it might be, as a mode of transport to commute before COVID. But people chose not to. People chose to get in the vehicles, or if you were lucky, public transport, or unlucky, depending which way you look at it. But people chose to go on in a vehicle. And then COVID came along and suddenly your freedom to go and ride your bike was restricted. So even though you've probably never ridden a bike for donkey's years, the fact somebody told you that you couldn't made you want to go and do it all the more. So that's what we found, that when you did have that brief moment of time where you could go out and you were encouraged to go out and exercise, people rediscovered riding a bike, people rediscovered the joy of going out, having a walk, playing football with the kids, whatever else it might be. So what we need to do is make sure that now we're coming out the other side of this pandemic, that we don't slip back into what we did before. We don't slip back into the norm just because that's what we used to do, the way we always used to do it, like our engineers. Let's not fall into that trap. Let's keep that momentum going, and let's make it easy, make active travel the easy option. If we want people to ride to work and walk to work, like I said, we need to understand why they didn't do it before, because nothing's actually changed other than our mindset. So what is it that prevented people? Was it because they didn't feel safe on the infrastructure? Was it because there wasn't facilities at the workplace to enable them to do it? But now things have changed and they're working from home more and all these different factors. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we should use COVID as kind of that catalyst for change to help us achieve the things we now want to achieve. And now's the time to strike, whilst people have it in their minds that they are able to adapt and they are able to change. And actually people are quite willing to change. People are in this situation now where people are open to new ideas, doing things differently. You know, there's a desire to change. So we should embrace that and use it.
Yeah, I just want to come back on one thing. I also wonder whether or not it's more that we can do to actually put ourselves in the shoes of, you know, other people to inform our design. Because I said to somebody yesterday, I when I drive now, even though I cycle as well, I'm much better about giving cyclists room because I've been a cyclist on the same road.
Yeah.
And one of the best meetings I've had in the last couple of months was with a dementia sufferer. It just opened my eyes to kind of all the issues that you sort of just don't ever sort of, you know, think about, and wondering whether or not, you know, there's more that we can do as professionals, but other professionals, to kind of put ourselves in the shoes of, you know,
absolutely. Because
other people.
yeah, you're absolutely spot on, because like I said, quite often we'll come up with what we believe to be the right solution to an issue, and we'll just go with it because it's all about getting something done quick, getting out there, earning the money. That's what's driving us all to do it. But if you actually took that step back and took the time to actually engage with the people who were involved right at the beginning, get them part in the design phase, go to the people who you're ultimately trying to influence and ask them, why are you doing this? What makes you do this? What makes you make that choice? What's influencing your decision? What would it take to make things differently? What if we did something like this? What would you think? Now, the benefit to doing all that is you're actually getting that really valuable insight and intelligence right at the very beginning of the process, so that when you come to deliver whatever the solution, the intervention may be, it's intelligence led, which is massive. You know that you're actually coming up with the right solution to the problem. So in terms of efficiency and cost effective, it's actually going to be better than doing it the other way when you're doing it based on assumptions, because you know for a fact that you're actually addressing the right root cause of whatever that issue is. But the other thing is, if you get people to feel part of that journey, that you've actually took the time to listen, to engage, to understand things from their perspective, to increase your knowledge, and you develop that solution together, you have a far higher chance of acceptability and adoption of that behaviour change, because they've been part of that process. It's been done with them instead of at them. And therefore, they're more likely to take ownership and accountability of that change and encourage others to accept that change because they've been part of it. So I guess the answer to your question would be, take that time, make that time to say, hang on a minute, let's engage with who it is. Whoever the end audience is, engage them at the beginning. Don't leave it till the very end. And that's one of the lessons they've learned on Smart Motorways, that they now need to go back and engage with the road users and really start bringing them on that journey now, as to try and get them to understand the change to this, to the road network, and really get people to understand how they need to adapt their behaviours for this new environment. So yeah, going back and speaking to people is the best advice I can give.
Okay, brilliant. Marion, I think that's how you say your name, sorry if it's not, just had a bit of a reflection on that. Whilst it is important to influence behaviour, we also need to look at the engineering solutions available to us, particularly around the active travel scenario. We may not always be able to engineer these solutions to accommodate the requirements. In addition, to influence people in the use of public transport, this has to be accessible, affordable, and the connectivity has to be sustainable.
Absolutely. It also has to be reliable. As somebody who's been, hindered by the trains today, when they had trains but no drivers. So again, comes back to the people. Always comes back to the people. But no, you're absolutely right, and that's where the safe system comes in. So it says it's that balance. It isn't just one strand of the system. It's not just getting the infrastructure in place. Isn't just about the vehicles on it and the people. It's that combination of all of it. So yeah, I completely agree with you. You're absolutely right. It's not just working with the people, but then it's not just about engineering. It's a combination.
Russell asked, how effective are campaign messages such as on VMS?
Well, how should I answer this? Not very. And the reason I say that is, I'll give an example. So one of the first jobs I did when I left the police and went to Highways Agency, and I was talking about how you need to come at things from a more intelligence-led way. You need to use your data. You need to come up with different messages and things. And they were like, no idea what you're talking about. I said, let me show you. So I looked at all the incident data that was collated about incidents on the motorway network. One of the ones that caught my attention was vehicles running out of fuel. And I was like, why do people run out of fuel? How hard can it be to put fuel in your car? You know it tells you. It even gives you a flashing warning light and you still ignore it. So how hard can it be? So did some analysis, came up with a report and said, right, here you go. This is how big of a problem you've got. Here are key areas on the network where you've got a bigger problem than others. Again, need to understand the why. Why do you have more cars breaking down out of fuel there than you do here? And you'd unpick it and you say, well, some of it's because of the gradient, some of it's because of the road layout. It affects the level of the car, which affects the ability to read whether they've got fuel. Bit of a dodgy excuse, but that's what people used. You had the cost of fuel. So people were still putting, scarily, it was outside of university, this hotspot, and we went and engaged, asked the students. So we seem to see an increase in this area in the, your kind of age group who were breaking down. Why are you all suddenly running out of fuel? And scarily, these were like the geniuses of the future. And they said, well, I used to always put £5 in on a Monday and it'd do me till Friday, but for some reason it's not lasting till Friday anymore. And it's like, well, that's because fuel's gone up. You still put a £5 in, you're not getting as much fuel. who'd have thought? So again, it's about understanding the people. But coming back to the VMS messages, one of the things we also said was, let's use the VMS signs to put a message on to try and engage, try and get into people. And they've said, okay, we'll give it a go. What message should we put up? So we put the message up, check your fuel. Nice, clear, easy for people to read when they're driving, not overcomplicated. And what actually happened, and I swear this is true, we got people pulling up on the hard shoulder, using the emergency telephone to the control room to say, right, I've pulled up. Like, okay. The message telling me to check my fuel. What am I checking for? You're like, seriously? Seriously? And we're like, yeah, have you got fuel? Yeah, well, get off the bloody hard shoulder. You know, and it was like, so people, even though you put what you think to be as a really sensible, clear message that won't be misinterpreted, still misinterpreted. So then the message was changed to check your fuel level to give you a hint that it was like, make sure you've got. And there's people who still abuse it, and we still have people running out of fuel, even though there's a sign right above them telling them to check they've got fuel. And heaven help us when it comes to electric vehicles. But that's a whole different conversation. So yeah, they can work. I think there's always that risk though that they're going to be misinterpreted. Another example, I'm up in the northwest. I was driving down to the National Control Centre where they set all the strategic signs. And I'm driving along, and I don't know if anybody knows up in the northwest, but there's a place called Warrington Town. And there was a message up on the VMS, and it said, avoid Warrington. Now, being from in that area, it's probably good advice. Nobody wants to go to Warrington. But it was just a really strange random message. And when I went in the control room, I said, why is there a message up saying avoid Warrington? And they went, oh, there's a big fire. Don't you think it would have been helpful to put some of that message on somehow? So again, they were like, well, we just thought it was easier, just tell them to avoid Warrington altogether. Yeah, but it actually made me want to go to Warrington to see what I'm trying to avoid. So again, you've got to understand people and why we do the crazy things that we always do.
Okay. Mark's just put comment. Fair point. I do, however, think we could do more on the engineering solutions to favour active travel and public transport over car-based thinking, being the first point of call. And that also extends to other policy areas where all too often decisions are made on the first assumption that people will drive first, then walk or cycle second.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. But again, it goes back to that understanding what are the things that are affecting people's choice to do a more active travel? Is it because they don't feel safe on the road, in which case would an engineering solution be, one of the many things in a suite of interventions you could do? So I think my only point would be, yes, I agree with you, but just take the time to actually ask the people, what are the things that are stopping them doing what it is you want them to do? It just gives you that, if nothing else, reassurance and brings them on that journey with you, which helps our reputation and customer satisfaction, all that kind of stuff.
And I mean, I would just add one other thing on that one. You mentioned about sort of safety and stuff like that. If you were to say to people, would you go in a mode of transport where you're 9 times more likely to die than another mode of transport, which 2 modes would you think I'm referring to, and which is the most deadly, travelling long distance? People would actually jump first of all. Oh, it's train. No, it isn't. You're 9 times more likely to die on a car journey over a length of distance than you are on a train. But there's a perception out there that has been allowed to, go around for sort of ever. And yeah, I think it just perhaps goes back to, we think of behaviours from a car mindset first and foremost, and that then how. And then that permeates into designing networks which are based around the car, putting hospitals that are based around the car. When sometimes we should have a bit of an early engagement, as you say, with some users, but also not be afraid to challenge some of those things as well.
Absolutely. So an area of work I was responsible for a while ago was motorcycle casualties on the strategic network, not causing them. I was meant to be preventing them. Because we had a big problem with motorcycle casualties. And again, going back to what I talked about before, I could engage with the motorcycle community on the roads, but only the ones in various associations. And again, they weren't the right audience. The people who were in a motorbike association weren't the motorcyclists who were doing the crazy overtake or doing the crazy wheelie or whatever other action they were doing that resulted in, unfortunately, fatalities. So how did we get to them? So we decided, well, at the end of the day, we can only do what we can do. Let's at least get those associations together and let's see what we can do. So we did. And I said, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a police officer, purposely get him to come in full uniform, because people have this assumption that if they're in uniform, they know what they're talking about. And we'll leave that one there as someone who's ex-police. But yeah, you have this assumption. And I got this police officer to come in. I said, right, I want you to talk in great detail and explain what you actually do at the scene of a fatal collision. It doesn't have to involve a motorcycle, can be anything. Just really go through the process of how you gather that evidence and how you use that evidence to determine what actually was the cause of that collision, what actually happened, what was the sequence of events and the effects, and so on and so forth. And that took all morning of this meeting. And then we broke for lunch. And then after lunch, we came back and we said, right, now, you now fully understand how it's indisputable. That is what happens. That's the evidence. It's fact. Yeah, we get all that right. Now, these are the statistics about motorcycle casualties, in that the majority of motorcycle collisions is actually of some responsibility of the motorcyclists themselves, because of the action they did, the decision they made, whatever. And they couldn't argue with it, because we'd gone through that process first of them understanding the facts. They then couldn't dispute that, oh, well, actually, if you're saying that in all these fatal collisions that involved a motorcyclist, it was found to be because it was the motorcyclist's action, I can't really argue with that, because I now know what you've done to understand that. Do you know what I mean? So it was about coming at it in a different way. And sometimes we need to do that with, you know, the target audience for active travel. Let's get them to understand what we want them to do. Let's get car drivers to understand potentially the risks they're putting themselves in by choosing that mode of transport over another one. So again, it's just another example of coming at things differently.
Great, thanks. We've just got a bit of an observation. There's been a lot of investment in new active travel infrastructure in Wales, and a notable increase in those cycling can be seen. As an observation, in Cardiff, there is an increasing number of safety issues with cyclists jumping red lights. It does highlight the need to really understand the human factor element in cyclist decision making, to bring lessons on how to best design active travel going forward.
Absolutely. And what I'd say on that is, again, we need to get society to adapt to this change. You know, that you've now got this integrated transport system where it's not just like cars and vans and things on the road. You have now got this active mode of transport as well. And we've got to find a way of getting each side to understand each side's perspective, and try and find a way to integrate effectively, which is, you know, definitely on the cards of what's happening. But one of the problems you've got with people who are perhaps on the pedal cycle is they have this belief that they're invincible. Sadly, they're not. You know, that it's everybody else but them. So going back to the motorcycle example I just gave, not always necessarily the case. And that if they are travelling on the road network, they too have to comply with the rules and regulations of the road network. And sadly, that's not always the case. So that's where you then go back to that compliance triangle I showed, where you've got to start thinking that, well, are they willfully violating the rules of the road? Some might be, maybe enforcement's the answer there, but quite the majority, I would say, are not obeying necessarily the rules of the road, because maybe they don't understand them. Because just because you can ride a pedal bike on a road doesn't mean you can drive a car on a road, therefore you might not know what the rules of the road are. So again, you know, it's about understanding. Always goes back to that. You need to understand why people are doing what they're doing.
Kathy, just add into that point. I think picking up on Mark's comment earlier about putting yourself, from a designer, putting yourself in the user's shoes, in effect. So something like that, the comment I made there, I know that on that cyclist, if there's a red light that's longer than quite a short period, 50% of the bikes will find a way, once they know it, to go through. To particularly Deliveroo. I hope it's Deliveroo. Yeah, so it's understanding that, and it's like, right, is that decision making, are you ever going to change how those cyclists think? Probably not, to be honest. But then it becomes like, what is an acceptable level of, you've got to stop and wait there.
But that goes back to the example in the presentation, the Homer Simpson scenario of where he hit the tree. And when you unpicked why that driver in that scenario hit the tree, it was because he was distracted, pressures at work. It was because, you know, medication and no sleep in that scenario. But people going through the bike, like you going through the red light, like you just spoke about, like Deliveroo, they're under immense time pressures to get that delivery done. So they feel they haven't got the time to wait for that light to change because of the alternative pressures, which is causing cognitive pressure on them. So going back to the psychology and the physical aspects, that outside factor is influencing the choices as a human, and that's what you can influence. You can't necessarily influence that person directly, but you could look at influencing Deliveroo, for example, to give them more reasonable delivery slots. I don't know, that kind of thing. You get the point.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. We haven't had any other questions. Oh, we just had one through. Bring back cycling proficiency tests so cyclists are educated regarding the rules of the road. Not all cyclists are drivers, for example.
Absolutely. I agree. At the end of the day, I guess it all comes down to budgets, which is, way beyond my pay grade to worry about. But yeah, I agree. At least when you were youngsters and you were taught how to ride a bike, you knew the basic rules of the road. But again, we keep changing the rules of the road. The highway code has recently just been updated. How many people have genuinely gone and, gone online and looked at the latest version and read what the changes are? I've not. And I'm married to a driving instructor, which is the only reason I know that the highway code has changed. So again, we keep changing the rules. We've changed the whole layout of a motorway to a smart motorway, but not found a way to effectively engage with people to explain that and educate them. So we've still got a lot to do.
Okay. I'll come to Mark. I think he's got his hand up
again. Yeah, I mean, some of my colleagues might probably kick me virtually about this one. I think there's a danger that this could become anti-cyclist, anti-anyone who's not in a car, because like talk of cycling proficiency, all well and good, but actually I think driver proficiency, and it goes back to the point I made earlier about language and the kind of mindset about human behaviours. It's amazing on the BBC and other media websites how often there's reference to cars being driven into people. And it's kind of, so there's nobody in that car then. Is it driving itself? There's a human in that car. They have undertaken some behaviour which may not be their own fault, but often is their own fault. And yet the language always comes out, it's the car driven into a pedestrian. And it's the same, I have to say, you could probably go 50 years without retaking your driving test. And yet we're wanting people to do cycling proficiency lessons. It's kind of, I think there's a danger. We're talking about human behaviours. I think we should also include all of us, and that includes people who drive, people who walk, and I don't know how we're ever going to address the fact that there's nothing in the highway code that will stop me from walking down the centre of a road, unless it's a motorway or a dual carriageway. And
even then, sadly, people still walk down the middle of it.
I know, but I could walk happily down, the B road outside my house at the moment. Nothing to stop. Nothing that says in the highway code to stop me doing that. There is in the highway code that you shouldn't drive on pavements and park on pavements. But do we focus on that? No, I think it's been an interesting discussion to observe, because I think it illustrates for me how kind of the behaviours in lots of things still maybe are seen through one mindset when it comes to transport, and that is driving, and yet
I agree. And especially in Wales, they've made it really clear, the Welsh government, what their objectives are with the 10 objectives, and it's all about that sustainability and encouraging people to make alternative choices when it comes to transport. And using the example about active travel, we Wales want people to choose not to be in the car and to be on the cycle. Well, you've got to make riding your bike the easier option. You've got to make it easier to get your bike out and ride your bike than it is to get in your car. And at the moment, it's easier to get in your car, which is why people choose. They'll always go for the easy option. So you've got to make it easy. You've got to make it attractable. You've got to make it, almost incentivized in some way. I'm not talking monetary, but some way, make it the preferred option to get people to make that active choice to change. But I agree with what you're saying, Matt. There's so much that needs to be done, which is why you need me and people like me.
I think we've got one more question from Niall. Got your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I made that comment regarding cycling proficiency as a cyclist and a former traffic signing practitioner. So I think I'm a bit obsessed with traffic signs and road markings and things like that. So I do think there is, you know, a place for education. I see Sean's comment there that cycling proficiency is taught in schools, but I don't think it's taught in all schools. So I think there is a place for education still. It's not being anti-cyclist or anything like that. You know, it's about educating people, you know, because a lot of cyclists may not be drivers. They may not be aware of the highway code. And while there's, you know, things in the highway codes about, driving over pavements and, being able to walk down the middle of the road, you know, those messages are conveyed by traffic signing and things like that. You know, for example, in dual carriageways, there's prohibitions of pedestrians on the motorway. You're not allowed to walk on the motorway because that's, you know, part of motorway regulations, albeit they may not be, clearly defined in the highway code. But those rules and things are out there. But if people aren't aware of those rules and not educated about them, then they won't obey them because just, purely through lack of awareness and that. So there is a place for education. So, and that will inform people's behaviour, whether they stick to the rules or not. Well, then that's about influence and, and that, and that's a different ballgame then again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And like I said, it goes back to what I said in the presentation, that the vast majority of the public will obey. They'll understand the rules and they'll obey. They're the vast majority. So you've got to, and also when I said in the presentation, most people want to comply. Most people want to be in that group that obey, they comply, the norm, the kind of the good ones, you know, like in inverted commas, they're the good group. And that's what people naturally want to go in because that's the easier option to be the ones who are following the rules. So you need to use that. So a really good way of looking at it is things like smoking. They wanted to change behaviour of society. They wanted to get people to stop smoking. So they made it really expensive. That was one intervention they did. Stop some, didn't stop them all. They put scary pictures on the fag packets. Again, stop some, not others. They started going in and engaging with children to try and get to the next generation. And what slowly started to happen was through children relaying those messages to the parents, through people being more aware of the risks and the consequences and so on and so forth. The whole reason why we saw this big change in people smoking and now not smoking is it's become society has deemed that it's unacceptable to smoke. It's no longer accepted. So if you want to be in this big group of the good, the conforming, the good group, then you don't smoke because it's become unacceptable in society. So you almost need to think, well, how can we use something like that approach to influence behaviour to active travel? How do you make it, for argument's sake, if you wanted to, I'm not saying you should, that you didn't want people to use cars anymore? Well, how do you make it so that is almost unacceptable in the new world, the new society of sustainability, and get them to want to be in the conforming group, which may well be active travel? You get where I'm coming from. It's about how can we get society to make the changes rather than just one approach.
Okay. There's another question. Is there any evidence to suggest how effective speed awareness courses have influenced people to drive slower or safer?
Yes, there's lots of research out there. You only need to Google it. There's lots of reports out there. What they've found is if people actually have a consequence for their actions, it's quite effective in changing their behaviours. So most people, look at average speed cameras. People have finally got the head around what an average means, because right in the early days we'd be sat in the control room watching the cameras of people speeding, slamming on. They kind of got the thing now. But what happens now with average speed cameras is they've got such a high level of compliance because people know there is a real visible accountability for their actions if they don't. Most people know somebody who's actually got done, as in prosecuted, for not obeying an average speed camera. So it's a real visible threat. It's not just kind of this, well, if I speed, I'm going to have a crash and die. People think, no, I'm not. I'm invincible. Doesn't apply to me, because they may not know anybody, fortunately, who has speeded and consequently had a crash that resulted in a fatality. So it's not a real visible threat to them. So what happens with the speed awareness courses is you've actually been caught. So there is a real visible threat, consequence to your action because you're having to go on the course. And 9 out of 10 people who attend those courses have always reported back, and this is evidence, you can find this out there on Google, is that people go on these courses with the view, oh God, I really didn't want to come. I came just so I didn't get the points on my license. It's a waste of time. You don't mean me. I was just speeding that one occasion. I don't normally do it. Load of rubbish, but that's what people go in. And then what happens is they have the training course, and at the end of it, say, I've learnt so much. I never thought about this. I didn't know the highway code had been updated. I was able to discuss this. I now understand this more, and their driving improves as a result. And then they go on and talk to their friends and family and say, actually, I went on one of these speed awareness courses and it was really good. And I did this, and I did that, and I learned this because I was speeding, because I got caught. So again, it carries on influencing people's compliance because somebody knows somebody who's gone through it. Having said all that, I got caught speeding and I was stupid enough to take the points because I didn't want to go on the course. So I thought it'd be a bit embarrassing to sit there and tell them what I did for a living. So I took the points.
I know, you could have led the session.
No, I took the fine and the points instead. But slowed down. I did slow down.
Some great questions and some great answers there, Kathy. Thank you. So as usual, the slides and recording will be uploaded onto the SharePoint site and the Teams site after the session. I'll be emailing around a feedback survey after the webinar ends for you to provide some comments on the session as well. The next webinar will be held on the 15th of June and will explore carbon management and reduction. I'll be sending out an invite in the next couple of weeks, so just look out for that. So I think we'll end the session there. Thanks, Kathy. That was a really great session.
No problem. I enjoyed it. Thanks. And if anybody wants me, you'll be pleased to know there's only one Catherine Wilson Ellis on the system, so I'm easy to find.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks everyone. Bye.